Hello and welcome to week 2 of our sweater weather knit along. We have just started with a rainstorm. It was a perfect sunny summer day here in Muskoka and the rain has just come. So it's going to be cooling down very quickly. I am wearing one of our chosen sweater projects. This is option number 2, Keeper of the Woods. And I'll probably have to wear it home tonight because it's going to be quite cool. So we'll just do a quick recap. I'm here with Super Sandy today. She will be monitoring the comments, so please send us a wave. Let us know where you're watching from, what your weather is like today, and how much progress you've been making on your sweaters since last week. So a quick recap. Last week we started with option 1. Option number 1 is the PJ pullover. This is a nice beginner level sweater and it is very luxurious and lightweight, knit with not one but 2 strands together, all natural fibers. So we have the fluff, which is the kid mohair and silk, and then we have the cotton merino. So those two held together on a fairly large needle create this very simple slouchy crew neck pullover. We just got in a new addition to the color range this week. It's a very light purple soft lilac together with the fluff in the lilac mist. Makes a really nice tone on tone shading. And then we had option number 2, which I'm wearing, Keeper of the Woods. This features 1 pine tree at the front, 2 pine trees at the back. It has the nice drop shoulder, extra large sleeves, which we'll talk about today, and the Guernsey style pattern across the top. It's knit bottom up, seamed, and you only need a circular needle to do the neckline. The neckline can again be your personal preference. It can be a stand-up, a roll, a turtleneck, or traditional crew neck. And then we moved along to option number 3. This one is knit in Llama Natural Chunky, and it is a combination of merino and llama, and it is completely undyed. It's the natural color of the animal fiber. And we have it in, I think, 3 or 4 shades. The cream has been a popular choice, which always happens when you see it knit up. Sometimes your eye is just drawn to the original color. And then we have it in the light fawn. There was a light gray that sold out, and a deeper shade of fawn. So that is a more advanced project because it does incorporate lace work, decreases, reading a chart, and also shaping shoulders and neck while you're in the lace pattern. And then option number 4B is ranunculus, which is behind me in the soft powdery pink. This is knit top down on circular needles, so you have no seams. That's always a bonus. And it has an interesting array of textured stitches across the yoke and eyelets, and then it has the sleeves picked up and knit down, and again you can choose your preference with a ribbed border, traditional style like all of the other sweaters have, or you could do the I-cord to give it a nice balloon shaped puffy sleeve. So I think that's kind of where we're at for the recap. The important thing to remember too with our knit along, if you are joining us for the first time, is not to feel pressured, not to feel rushed. It's not important for you to keep up to me as I'm explaining and giving you tips and hints and tutorials. It's more important for me to keep up to you so that I'm always staying one step ahead and I can think of areas in the pattern where you might need more clarification or the opportunity to make changes along the way. So that's the important thing. Take your time. It should be enjoyable, relaxing, And if you're feeling stressed and your stitches are really tight on the needle, then put it away for a while, take a time out, and hopefully that will solve the issue. You'll come back with fresh eyes and fresh fingers. Oh, you're on the back of Keeper. That's excellent, Anne. So that means you have the opportunity to change the length before you get to the pattern work. So today we're going to cover a little bit more about how to get your perfect measurements for your sweater project. And don't forget, we have our trivia quiz at the end of this live segment. So there will be one lucky winner who gets another ballot in the draw bin. So right now we've got quite a few names in here. And as you know, each week we do a trivia quiz. And the first person to correctly guess the answer in here, we've got our grand prize on display over here, and it is more yarn. Beautiful array of natural fiber yarn with a suggested pattern to go with it. Nice light to medium weight, nothing too chunky, and I think there's some other goodies in there as well. So we'll be having the live draw on the 5th week. 4 weeks of knit along, and the 5th week is the live draw. So I'm going to start with the pattern notes. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the comments. The more questions, the better. Even if you think it's a silly question, it's probably the same question that somebody else wants to ask, and you will be doing them a favor by asking it first. So we have had some questions about raising the neckline on PJ pullover or drawing it in so that it's not as wide across the shoulders. So you were instructed last week that you could knit the back straight up and cast off. There's no changes to be made there other than adding or subtracting the length. So in the front you have the option of raising the neckline. You can go up an extra inch or two before you start shaping the neckline. That will not affect the outcome. And for the sides, if you feel that you have a very small shoulder width or shoulder frame, you may want to have a narrower neck. You don't want it to be too tight. You still have to fit it over your head. So in that case, when you're casting off the center number of stitches, you can still do that as written in the pattern, but when it comes to decreasing the stitches along the side here and here, you can subtract. So I'm going to look at the pattern and give you some numbers. And this is the same thing with any crew neck pullover that you do. So it is suggested that you would be decreasing 1 stitch at the beginning of the next right side rows 3 times. So in a large tension like this, reducing one of those decreases on either side, or even 2, would bring it in at least an inch and a quarter, I would say. So if you feel that that's more of a comfortable fit for you, by all means, you can just avoid doing 2 decreases on each side or 1 decrease on each side. That will give you more stitches when you cast off across the shoulder, which is perfectly fine because you don't have any shoulder shaping across the back where you have to match up to a certain number of stitches. So that's an easy fix. That will of course reduce how many stitches are picked up around the neckline, and that we'll get into in the 4th week when we get into the finishing stages. So that's the only change you have to worry about on the front of PJ pullover. And the next one is Keeper of the Woods, the one I'm wearing. Same thing. If you wish to raise the neck, this is now a good example of how it fits. I know sometimes when I have the sweaters on a mannequin or a hanger frame like this, you don't really get to see where the neckline sits on a human being. So I don't feel that this neckline is too low for my style. But if you want to raise it up a slight bit, that just means you have to work a further 2 or 4 rows in the pattern after you complete your chart section. I would not continue with the second tree. There's a second tree which is on the back of the sweater because of course the back neck is higher, but on the front we finish the first pine tree and then we cast off for the neck shaping. In this case you would just do plain stocking stitch at the top of the tree and continue the zigzag patterns on the chart. Does that make sense? You can also reduce the number of decreases and it'll be exactly the same as this. So where it says to decrease 1 stitch so many times, you just don't do it that many times. That will create more stitches when you cast off your shoulders, which is not a problem as well because this does not have shoulder shaping. And Lorna has a question about line 23 on the chart of option number 3. So that's going to come up in the next in my next paragraph. And just to finish up here, also remember to cast off extra loose for the shoulders. We sometimes have knitters who want to be very neat and tidy, and they tend to tighten up. They decrease, tighten up, decrease, tighten up, or cast off a stitch, tighten up, cast off, tighten up. It's really making it difficult for you to sew your seams at the final finish, and it also will pull in the shoulders and they'll get very lumpy and bumpy. So try to cast off a bit looser. If you're a tight knitter overall, just use 1 size larger needles for that final cast off. It'll make things much easier and it will just have a nice smooth finish. Okay, so that is I think all we're going to change on Keeper of the Woods. Adjusting the neck a little higher and bring it in a little narrower if you choose to do that. So now we're on to option 3, Lorna. So option 3 probably has the most notes because it is more complex. So first of all, Lorna had a very good question, which I'm sure some of you too were wondering about. Because option number 3 is on a chart, you have a certain number of rows that you have to repeat. And the repeated section is outlined with a dotted line, and it is a 14 stitch repeat going across. So every 14 stitches you just repeat the pattern to the very end. But the number of rows that you are to repeat is 20 rows. That completes one of the leaf motifs, and then you're ready to start the next. So Lorna is wondering if she has to do row 23 or does she ignore it. She ignores that because her dotted line refers to the section from row 3 to 22. So Lorna, when you finish row 22, which is your wrong side row, you're ready to start on row 3 again, which is the right side row. Does that answer your question? European charts just tend to give a bigger picture, and then they put the repeat section on top of it just to show what it looks like overall. It's a bit confusing. I think if it was a North American charted pattern, it would make a bit more sense to us. So that is a question about the chart. Now, a few of you also had questions about the decreases for the shoulders. So this one, unfortunately, you don't get off easy. You don't get to just cast off all your stitches in one row like you do on this and this across the back. This one has staggered shoulder shapings, and it also refers to shaping the back neck. We're going to ignore that section only because, well, my personal preference, I'll just explain why I would ignore that section, but it's totally up to you. So when you see the back of a sweater with its neckband, I didn't shape the back neck here. I shaped the shoulders to give it a nice form over the human shoulders, but I didn't shape the back neck because then the neck would be sagging down. That means my collar would get lower in the back than I want it to. I want the collar to stand up and keep my neck warm. So for that reason, I cast off the back neck stitches straight. So that's what I'm going to refer to in this explanation. So in your pattern, depending what size you're doing, I think most of you are doing the small to medium size because it is so oversized. The pattern refers to casting off or binding off. Binding off is the American term, and casting off is the universal term. For the slope shoulders, size small, medium, 6 stitches 4 times. That means they want us to cast off 6 stitches at the beginning of the next 4 rows in your pattern. Now that sounds pretty easy, but once you start casting off, you sometimes take away some of the stitches from the next pattern repeat, because this pattern is set up that you have yarn overs that are followed by a center decrease, and then you have another yarn over that belongs to that center decrease. So for that reason, I'm suggesting that before you start your first shoulder shaping, that you place markers on your needle to outline the number of stitches. So say it's 6 stitches, so you put a marker after the first 6, and then you put a marker after the next 6, and the same on the other side. So coming from the opposite end in, place a marker at the 6th, and then in between the 12th and 13th stitch. This will keep you lined up so that when you are casting those off, you haven't taken 7 or 8 or only 5. That's pretty important in any lace pattern. Then the next problem is, after you cast off 6, you have to know where you are starting across your pattern row. So you can either mark off the 6 stitches on your chart just to remind you what you're starting with. In this case, we would take off the edge stitch. Say we're on row 5, we would take off the edge stitch and then cast off 1, 2, 3 knit stitches, a purl stitch, and another purl stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then the pattern would be asking us to start with a yarn over, but we can't start with a yarn over because the stitch that's remaining on the needle is acting in its place. So that means you have to subtract 1 stitch from your double decrease. If you can't do a yarn over, you cannot do its matching decrease. That's very important. They do put a little note about that above the chart, and I'm just explaining it in further detail. So yes, that I would say it's easier to cast off going back on the wrong side rows, because then you're just working the stitches as they appear. You're not worried about doing yarn overs and double decreases. So you're only going to have trouble for the right side row cast off shoulder and the next right side row cast off shoulder. And then we're going to eliminate shape back neck. We're just going to work back and forth, and when you finished your shoulder shaping rows, you cast off the remainder of your stitches on the right side row, and that will be your back neck. And I think Super Sandy had a question coming in. Okay, Keeper has done 2 repeats of chart A on row 29 of chart B. Do I start row 1 now? You are on row 29 of chart B. Do I start row 1 now? And I'm going to look at the chart so I can see where you are. So you finished 2 repeats of chart A, okay.
Oh, sorry.
1 second. Yes, so chart A is a repeat of 14 rows. Chart B is a repeat of 32 rows. So those 2 charts in this particular pattern have to work side by side. Do I start row 1 again of chart A? Yes, you do. So once you've repeated chart A, the 14 rows, Cindy, you have to keep going back over and redoing the exact same sequence. So that's what's going to give you the continuous zigzag, which outlines your center tree motif. Okay, sounds like you got a lot of knitting done this week, if you're up that far. So any other notes about option 3? It was basically just the shoulders I wanted to explain. Omit that neck shaping at the back. The front, of course, is a direct copy of the back, except for the lower shaping here. So again, if you want the neck to be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, you can play around with that and start your shaping where you like. For standard designs, a crew neck or round neck sweater starts 3 to 3.5 inches from the shoulder down. So that gives you a good guideline. If you want a scoop neck, you would start at 4 to 4.5 inches down from where you finish at the shoulder. You would like to see back of keeper, okay. I hope it shows up on the camera. So keeper has 2 pine trees that go right up to the neck, and the neck is cast off straight across. I feel like I'm a scarecrow standing in a field. I think we have a delivery. Oh, Fridays are always great because we get a delivery coming. Yeah, so the way this pattern was designed, Deborah, I made sure that I had enough room to fit 2 pine trees on top of each other before casting off across the back neck. And then I adjusted the neckline to start right after the first pine tree. I didn't want to have like a quarter of a pine tree stem or, you know, the first branch. It doesn't look very professional to me, so that is why the neck placement is where it ended up. So back to option 3, the Italian lace sweater. Yes, so you can adjust the front neck. We're going to talk about picking up stitches and doing the collars later on. I don't want to jump out of sequence with the way you're following the pattern. You may notice that it's very standard in the world of knitting patterns or crochet patterns. When you're doing a garment, you're always doing the back first. The reason for that is just to get used to the pattern, and if you happen to make a few errors or mistakes, they are on the back. Nobody's going to notice it. It helps you become familiar with the pattern, work on getting your tension established, and then usually the front is the second part, and then the sleeves are the last part. So that is how these are constructed and the one I'm wearing. And then the ranunculus, because it's a more modern construction, it's worked from the top down. So you're working the yoke and the body all at the beginning, and then the body on its own and leaving the sleeves to the very end. And I know you're all going to want to see what's inside these 2 boxes, but you'll have to wait till next week. So the only changes really I want to go over about ranunculus are you can add length to the body. Most of you would probably add length because it is very short and cropped in the original pattern. You can choose to add length in the stocking stitch, or you can add a much longer rib pattern at the bottom. But to keep the proportions, I think you'd probably like to add just in the plain stocking stitch. This ribbing is already about twice as long as a regular ribbing, so why add more to it? It just draws the attention to the ribbing and you lose all the interest at the top, which is that beautiful textured work. Okay, so now we're going to talk about back to our measurements, our guide to measuring. So most of these sweaters that you see here and wherever you're looking at designs, Ravelry or in Vogue Knitting or different pattern books, you'll notice that the trend is now to do a drop shoulder. So the drop shoulder is a sleeve that's cast off straight, and there is no shaped armhole to fit it into. And that makes it a little bit more difficult and challenging to measure your sleeve length. So if you were measuring your sleeve, if somebody said, well, you know, how long are you going to knit your sleeve? Chances are you would hold the tape measure up and cram it into your underarm and hold it up to your wrist bone and say, okay, I have to knit my sleeve 19 inches. But that's not the right way to measure your arm or your sleeve, because the drop shoulder does not sit in your underarm. It drops over the shoulder and down into about 1/8 of your sleeve. Some other people might say, oh no, the correct way is to measure from your shoulder bone down to your wrist. Well, no, that doesn't apply to these styles, the drop shoulders. So the correct way to take your sleeve measurement is to hold the tape measure, or have somebody at home do it for you. Hold the tape measure against the middle of your back. So you're looking for the pronounced spine bone, and then you're going to extend your arm slightly. I'll stand up in a minute. It's always easier to do this with someone helping you. So I have one end of my tape measure at the back of my neck, middle, and I'm holding it sort of on an angle, not straight out and not fully down. So just at a comfortable extension, and then decide where you'd like it to sit. So I like it just to my wrist bone. I don't like to go down to my knuckles. So that gives me a 29-inch length. But that's not the full length of your sleeve. That is encompassing half of the sweater. Okay, so you would write down the number 29. You need a calculator or a pen and paper. And then the next thing you do is you look at the width of your sweater. Generally, you want to knit the sweater back and front first, join it at the shoulder seams, slip it over your neck. Or, for our purposes, we're just going to look at the finished measurement. So the finished measurement of this sweater is 42 inches. That means the back should be 21 inches. So, Super Sandy, you got to help me here. So I'm taking my 29 inches. The back of my sweater is 21. I take half of the back measurement. 11.5. Okay. So I want to subtract 11.5 from 29. 10.5, sorry. So 29 minus 10.5.
18.5.
Okay. So my true sleeve measurement for this sweater should be 18.5 inches. So that tells me how far the sweater is going to drop over my sleeve, and then I just have to fill in the space to get to the natural wrist. And generally, sweaters with drop shoulders, the sleeve length will range from 16.5 to 18.5. If it's a man's sleeve, then they usually put in 19 to 21. It goes by height, of course. So that's your rule of thumb. You'll have to measure. This will work for ranunculus too. I know some of you are wondering if it's applicable for this one. It is. So you want to measure center of back to your wrist bone. Or if you prefer 3/4 sleeves, measure there. Bracelet length, measure there. Write down that number for reference, and then measure the width of the back of your sweater, divide it in half, and take that number off your full length. That will tell you exactly how long to knit your sleeve. So that is important for measuring. So for that reason, yes, I would say always join your shoulder seams back and front. Don't worry about picking up your stitches yet. Try on the sweater and then just see how far it falls over, and then you can see why sleeves are so short. When you have a sweater this wide, this is really oversized, I think it had 12 inches positive ease built in. Then the sleeve length is going to be shorter than it is on a sweater like this or this, which doesn't have as much width. So you'll notice that in patterns and you'll think, oh, there's something wrong with the sleeve length. It's not as long as the sleeve length in another pattern. Well, yes, because part of this sleeve is built into the body of the sweater. Okay, any more questions? We're good? So let's get on to our trivia. So next week we're going to go over the sleeves, how to minimize the volume in some of these sleeves. This one doesn't have any volume. It's a nice stretchy elastic fit. And this one doesn't really have any extra volume. So this week we're talking about merino wool, because this sweater, the one I'm wearing, and this sweater and ranunculus are all based on merino. This has a percentage of merino, this has a strand of cotton and merino, and this one has one strand of merino with the fluff yarn. So merino wool comes from a certain type of sheep which originated in Spain in the 12th century. Unlike regular wool, merino is extremely soft and non-irritating, and the reason for that is because it has the longest, finest fibers out of all the sheep breeds. This wool fiber can withstand being bent 20,000 times without breaking. In comparison, cotton breaks after only 3,000 bends, and silk breaks at 2,000 bends. So you can see this has so much more resilience, and it will last for decades and decades. The breathability of merino is far superior to cotton and man-made fibers. Okay, so here is our trivia question concerning merino sheep. Which country produces the most merino wool? And Super Sandy is standing by to see who correctly answers the question. And then I can tell you how many tons per year are produced in that country. It's quite amazing. Now, I have heard from some of you during the week about your progress. One of our knit-alongers is up halfway on the back of option number 3. Another one, I think, is up 3/4 of the way. She finds she can't knit on it continually because it is such a chunky wool and the needles are large, so it feels a bit awkward and it gets a bit heavy. So it's good to have another project to work on and take a break from. And we have our trivia winner this week. Congratulations, Cindy. You got the correct answer, which is Australia. So in Australia, 284,000 tons of wool are produced per year. For such a small country, they have the most sheep per capita, and they also produce that much wool fiber. Thank goodness it comes to Canada and, well, all of North America. So that's it for this week's check-in. Feel free to post any pictures on our events page. I think we've had a couple posted already this week. And again, don't feel under pressure. You don't have to keep up to me, and you don't have to keep up to anyone else. You just knit at your leisurely pace and enjoy the scenery outside. Go for walks, stay healthy. And we will be back next Friday to talk about the sleeves and a little bit more of the finishing. And in the meantime, everybody have a great week and hope to see you next week. Thanks for joining us.